I've been wasting so much time walking around the shop to get tools that I just haven't organized.
We gotta get organized.
So I'm gonna work on my shop efficiency by building this tool-specific organizer. I'm gonna walk you through my thought process of how I laid out those tools and how I decided what was going to take up this very valuable space in my shop. So let's get to it. I have two main workbenches in my shop. This is one of them, and this is the other. But as you can see, they're both pretty far from where my chisels, planes, and sharpening stones are stored. And once I'd grabbed the tools I needed, it was back to one of my two workbenches. This current setup obviously wastes a lot of time.
Well, that was a massive waste of time.
So this is where I'll be storing items from now on. Yeah, thanks, I'm pretty excited too. First up, I grab my tools and lay them out so that I can take some measurements and get a game plan together. With my layout loosely settled, I jump into the milling process and grab some leftover walnut, cause you know.
Treat yourself.
The milling process begins at the joiner so that I can establish a flat surface. I then head over to the planer to bring the stock down to its final thickness. After that, it's back over to the joiner so that I can make one edge straight and square to the planed surfaces. At the table saw, I rip the board to width, and the last step is to cut the board to length at the miter saw. To establish where I want the features in this tool holder, I do a bit of layout work, and then I head over to the drill press. This holder is for a mallet, so I grab a 1.5 inch Forstner bit and make some beautiful chocolate shavings. At the table saw, I cut a slot so that the mallet can be easily removed from the tool holder, and I adjust my miter gauge so that it's fairly close to the blade, so it'll give good support to the workpiece while it's being cut. Back at the workbench, which I do have plans for, I clamp the piece down and chamfer the inside. This helps the tool to seat nicely in the holder and not wobble around quite as much. At the drill press, I use Kreg's quick flip to drill a counterbore hole in this holder. This makes it super easy to mount the tool holder in place with just a pocket hole screw. After a quick test fit, I cut the tool holder to length at the miter saw. Next up, I rip a strip of walnut to width and I start laying out the hole locations for this piece that will hold all of my chisels. Since this piece is going to be larger, I go ahead and cut it to its final size. I can do all the subsequent steps safely on this, whereas with the other one, I couldn't. So back at the drill press, I grab a 5/8 inch Forstner bit and I drill a series of holes spaced 2 inches apart, and they are 1 inch from each end. So back over to the table saw, I take my time to line up the cuts. I don't want the slots to be too wide, which could allow the chisels to fall out. I also make sure that the blade height is low enough, so I only cut through the material I want to remove. Once I'm about halfway down the piece, I flip it over and I start cutting from the opposite side. Once again, we're back at the T-Track workbench to chamfer the inside edges of the tool holder with my little trim router. This way the chisels seat well in the holes. And everything was going just fine until this happened.
No, don't like that.
This is a very bad. Don't worry, we fix it.
There's no shortage of things a little CA glue and accelerator can't stick back together. And if you want to try out Starbond's CA glue, you can use the code WSM15 and save 15% on your order.
We fixed it.
Okay, so carrying on, I started going a little bit slower in the areas where I was climb cutting and took an extra pass in those sections as well. Thankfully, I didn't have any additional surprises with tear out and have to risk sticking my fingers together with more CA glue surgeries. To secure this to the organizer, I'll use 3 pocket hole screws, and I've already marked their locations with an awl. Since the slots in this holder are too small for the quick flip, I removed the counterbore piece and I put it in a standard bit holder for a drill. At the drill press, I set the depth so that I don't go too deep into the piece, and I drill the counterbore holes where I've already marked them. Alright, so now it's time to start the shelves for the planes, and this is a fun little portion of the project. I grab another piece of walnut and I cut it to length to fit my jack plane and block plane. And then over at the table saw, I rip these pieces to be about a 1/16 or so wider than the bottom of each plane. And Now, just for a quick dummy check, I set the planes on their respective shelves to make sure I'm on the right track. And thank goodness I am. Okay, so now I mark the blade location of each one of the planes on their respective shelves, and I cut a dado that's about a 1/2 inch wide and a 1/16 inch deep. The reason for this is to prevent the blade from being dulled by sitting on a somewhat hard surface. My college shop professor, if nothing, drilled it into our heads to always set a plane on the side for this very reason. And again, just another dummy check to make sure that things are where they're supposed to be. Now it's time to mill up some material to make the sides for these shelves. So using the table saw and band saw, I cut some strips to rough width, and then over at the drum sander, I bring them down to their final thickness of about 3/16 of an inch. At the miter saw, I cut a 45 on the end of one strip, and then I proceed to cut the strips to size. Rather than measuring the shelves and strips, I just hold the strips in place to the shelf, make a mark, and then I cut to my line. I leave the strips for the sides a touch long for the time being. To assemble the pieces, I apply a bit of the brown CA glue to both surfaces, and I hold them together against the shelf for support to the count of about 10 Mississippis. I then repeat this process on the other side. Now, one thing that's helpful when gluing end grain is to seal the end grain first with a thin layer of glue. And once all the miters are glued together, I hit them with accelerator to make sure that everything is cured, and then I fill any small gaps before I move on. To glue the bottom and sides together, I run a healthy bead of glue around the front and ends of the bottom piece, and then I slide it into place. I then hit it with accelerator and fill any voids as necessary. After a quick test fit to make sure things are good, it's over to the table saw to trim up the sides. And with that, all of the tool holders are done, and I can move on to making the box. So I grab a scrap piece of black melamine for the back of the box, and since this offcut wasn't square, I used my Kreg ACS. I cut one side perpendicular to the side previously cut on the table saw, and with this done, I go back to the table saw and finish cutting it to size. To secure the sides to this piece of melamine, I grab my 720 Pro and drill a series of holes around the perimeter. I'd like to take a minute while I put this away to say thanks to Kreg for sponsoring this project. They've made the plans for this build free, so just head over to their site, which is linked in the description below, to grab those plans, and then you can build an organizer like the one I'm making for your shop. I've already planed and ripped the material for the sides, so all that's left to do is cut them to their proper lengths. Next up, I put down a moving blanket and I go to town sanding the inside surface of each of these pieces. If you're wondering about a tool or product I used in this video, I have them all linked in the description, along with any discount codes that may be applicable. Before I attach the sides to the melamine, I wanted to go ahead and finish the inside surface. This just makes it easier to keep that hard wax oil off of the melamine. The oil I'm using today is a new product from Bidwell. I figured a shop project is the perfect thing to try out a new finish on, and so far I like what I'm seeing. Since I'll be hanging this organizer on my wall control panels, I didn't want the sides to be flush with the back because then that would create a huge gap between the wall control and the back of the organizer. So I found that 3 strips of 1/4 inch plywood, or 1 piece of 3/4 inch plywood for those of you who are witty and good with math, was about the perfect thickness. With these pieces clamped in place, I'm ready to secure them with the perfect amount of 1 1/4 inch pocket hole screws. With the top and bottom on, I trim the side pieces to size, and then I lay out for some counterbore holes on the end of each piece. With the counterbore bit from the Kreg Quick Flip, I drill 2 holes in the end of each of the side pieces. Here I'm using the flip stops on my drill press so that I can quickly drill the holes in the same location every time. Next, I secure the sides to the melamine with pocket hole screws, and then I shift over the clamps a bit and screw through the counterbore holes into the top and bottom pieces. Back at the drill press, I set up to cut some plugs, and if you can't tell, it is way past time for a new plug cutter. And things are really getting smoky in here.
Do you smell smoke?
To free the plugs from their friction charred home, I head over to the bandsaw and cut them out. The plugs fit fairly well as is, but for a little extra insurance, I add a touch of medium thick CA glue and accelerator. It's kind of like chicken soup. It ain't gonna hurt. To cut the plugs flush, I use a Japanese style pull stroke flush cut saw. I've had this one for a very long time, and as you can see, it still does a great job. I waited until now to sand the outside surface of the sides, so that way I could sand all the corners and plugs flush at once. Also, if I happen to dent or scratch anything along the way, I can fix that right now before I'm ready to finish. One last thing I need to do is finalize the placement of all the tool holders. I put a few items in place for reference, and I secure the chisel holder first since it's the single largest item. Then in the remaining space on the sides, I center and attach the mallet and draw knife holders. The shelves for the planes take a bit more planning to lay out. Since these will be secured with screws from the back of the box, I need to make sure that the holes are in the correct spot, that their locations are accurately transferred to the back of the shelves as well. The last thing I'd want to happen at this point is for me to split one of these shelves in half or have an extra screw pointing out somewhere. That'd be embarrassing. At the drill press, I use an 1/8 inch drill bit to pre-drill holes into the shelf. I set the depth to be about 3/8 of an inch shy from the front of the shelves, so that way, again, I don't accidentally drill all the way through the thing. So before installing all of the tool holders and shelves, I apply a coat of oil to all the pieces and let them cure for about 15 minutes. At this point, I simply reinstall the tool holders. The shelves, on the other hand, for the planes are secured with screws from the back of the box. I used two 2-inch screws for the small shelf, and even though I drilled 5 holes, I only ended up using 3 2.5-inch screws for the larger shelf. And with that done, I can now apply oil to the outside of the organizer. I don't know about you, but it's hard to not like the way oiled walnut looks. To hang the organizer on my wall control panels, I used a set of universal mounting brackets. I made sure to carefully lay out the location of the brackets so they would line up easily with the slots on the panels. My approach was to first secure one bracket and then measure the distance on my panels to where the next bracket needed to be located. I then transferred that measurement to my organizer and installed the bracket accordingly. To attach the brackets, I used a handful of 5/8 panhead screws. All of that effort in lining up the brackets pays off right about now while I'm trying to not fall off my workbench and hang this thing at the same time. I don't know about y'all, but this makes my terribly unorganized, but so desperately wanting to be organized self really happy. If you enjoyed this video, you're gonna love the workbench that I built right here. It has tons of storage and optimization for the shop. And if you wanna see other awesome woodworking projects from me, check out those. Until next time, have fun making something.